Horse flies, can you see it? Can you see them flying around my head? Horse flies, horse flies. Okay. One thing that's really cool about this garden is that I don't live here. I live 3 hours away. And I tend to visit it once a month I'll work in it for a day or two. So really, like maybe less than 10 days a year I spend in this garden. It's about 2,000 square feet. There's a lot of plants in it. And it does pretty well without me. And that's because I've set it up to do well without me. And so that meant really spending some time on improving the soil right when I built it. And it meant planting a lot of perennial plants that after that first year, they don't really need help from me anymore. And it also just means putting in systems that, or just having a strategy for dealing with the common maintenance tasks in a garden. One of the things that makes this garden so effortless is this mulch, that it's everywhere. And what happens to some people, especially new gardeners, when they're starting a garden, is they'll build a big garden, maybe ends up being a little bit bigger than they can handle, and they spend most of their year trying to keep on top of the weeds. Sometimes the weeds win and the garden becomes a weed garden for that year, or sometimes it's just frustrating because you want to be doing other things in your garden and you're just pulling weeds. And so the big answer to that is, first of all, don't make your garden too big. It's often better to have a small garden that you can really take care of. And the other thing is mulch. And leaf mulch is my favorite. Straw mulch is nice too. Wood mulch, I have other videos where I talk about wood mulch, and I finally started using it in this garden because the garden is ready for it, I'll say. It's just not as fun to walk on with bare feet. But any kind of mulch is going to be helpful there. So that is my biggest tip to most gardeners is use the mulch. I mean, not only for weed control, but also if you use a nice organic mulch, it slowly improves the soil, and it holds moisture in the soil, and it protects the soil from heavy rains and from erosion, and there's a dozen things mulch does, so go for it. Mulch. I've started leaving little areas around my garden to just go wild because, first of all, it will often provide homes for things like snakes, which I know some people don't like, but I do. I like to have them in the garden, and it'll start flowering eventually and attract different beneficial insects. And when I need something for mulch or for a compost pile, I have something right here that I can just cut down and use. So I find these wild areas to be really quite cool. Here is some comfrey poking its head out of my raspberries, and well, you can see a lot of bees hanging out on the berries behind there. Well, you might be able to see that. So this is the only comfrey coming up in my garden right now because this morning I pulled all of the rest of it and put it into my compost pile. Comfrey is a plant that once you have it forever. And I think if I left this garden for 2 years, it would become a comfrey garden. So that is the big negative of comfrey and why I advise most people not to plant it. That being said, if you have it, it is a wonderful thing to have. Every month when I come back and spend a day in my garden, I have 200, like every comfrey plant has dozens of these fronds that come up, and they're big leaved, and I put them into my compost pile. So my compost pile is largely made of comfrey. It's also highly medicinal, is used for a number of things by herbalists, but I just like it for it brings up nutrients from in the soil, becomes part of my compost, and creates that circle. There is a bumblebee. I love these things. They are so big and awesome. So this is my potato patch. I love growing potatoes. Some gardeners skip potatoes because they're very easy to find in a grocery store and they're not expensive, but I find that they're easy to grow and they're a great way for me to take my soil that I've worked so hard on improving and turning that into nutrition that lasts me all throughout the winter. So I really love growing potatoes. In Peru, they grow hundreds of species of potatoes. It used to be thousands of species, and they were a major part of their diet there. So potatoes are not all bad. They're all good. Now, I will say this. Behind my potatoes, I have something potentially even cooler called Jerusalem artichokes. You can see they're tall right there. They are related to sunflowers. They get really tall, and they have not big sunflowers, but nice little yellow flowers, but they have roots that are kind of knobby and a little bit of a pain to clean, but if you clean them, they cook sort of similarly to potatoes. They taste really nice. They don't store as nearly as well as potatoes, but they're a nice change. And what's cool about them is they're perennial. So every year I go and dig every Jerusalem artichoke out of there in the fall. Sometimes I'll even let them stay over winter and I'll get them in the spring. And miraculously, there's still some that come back and grow. So the only downside is if, they spread, and once you have them, you have them. But if you're okay with that, they're a really nice thing to grow.